Commander Zelthar's four eyes darted nervously between the reinforced containment unit and the datapad in his clawed hands. The massive creature inside had already killed 3 of his best guards in the past week. Its razor-sharp teeth could slice through military-grade armor like it was paper, and its speed was unlike anything they had encountered before. The Galactic Federation had captured this beast from the outer rim of the Andromeda sector. Scientists believed it held the key to understanding a new type of bioweapon that enemy forces were developing, but keeping it alive and studying it was proving nearly impossible. "Sir, we've lost another containment specialist," reported Lieutenant Vex, her blue skin turning pale with worry. "The creature broke through the energy barrier again. We need a new approach." Zelthar's mandibles clicked with frustration. His superiors were breathing down his neck, demanding results. The creature was too valuable to eliminate, but too dangerous to handle with conventional methods. Every species in the Federation had tried to work with it. The crystalline engineers had their equipment destroyed. The psychic manipulators couldn't even get close without experiencing severe mental trauma. "What about the humans?" suggested Vex quietly. "I heard they have some unusual methods for dealing with dangerous creatures." Zelthar's eyes widened. Humans were relatively new to the Federation. Most species considered them primitive and reckless. They came from a death world where everything seemed designed to kill them, yet they had somehow survived and thrived. Their approach to problem-solving was often considered insane by galactic standards. "The humans?" Zelthar repeated, his voice filled with doubt. "They barely understand our technology. What could they possibly do that our advanced species cannot?" "Sir, with respect, we're running out of options," Vex replied. "The creature killed the armored Titan guards yesterday. Their shells are supposed to be impenetrable, yet this thing tore through them like they were made of soft tissue." Zelthar looked at the containment unit again. The creature inside was pacing, its red eyes glowing with intelligence and malice. It was roughly the size of a small transport vehicle, with scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Multiple rows of teeth lined its massive jaw, and its claws could extend to nearly a meter in length. The Federation had classified it as a Class 5 predator, the highest possible threat level for a biological entity. Everything about it was designed for killing. Its saliva was acidic enough to melt through most materials. Its hide was thick enough to deflect plasma weapons. Even its breath carried toxins that could paralyze most known species. "Fine," Zelthar finally said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Contact the human delegation. Tell them we need their expertise with dangerous wildlife." 3 days later, a small human transport ship docked with the research station. Zelthar stood in the docking bay, watching as the airlock opened. He expected to see a team of specialists in advanced protective gear, carrying sophisticated equipment. Instead, a single human emerged. He was tall by human standards, with short brown hair and wearing simple work clothes. His skin was tan from what Zelthar assumed was sun exposure, and his hands looked rough from manual labor. Most surprisingly, he carried only a small bag and wore no protective equipment at all. The human walked up to Zelthar with a relaxed gait, as if he was arriving for a casual social visit rather than to deal with a deadly predator. "G'day, mate," the human said with a cheerful smile. "Name's Jake Harrison. Heard you folks have a troublesome critter that needs looking after." Zelthar blinked, all 4 eyes in confusion. This human seemed completely unconcerned about the danger he was walking into. The casual way he referred to the deadly creature as a critter was disturbing. "Mr. Harrison," Zelthar began carefully, "I must emphasize the extreme danger of this situation. This creature has killed multiple trained specialists. It is classified as the most dangerous biological entity we have ever encountered." Jake chuckled and adjusted the strap on his bag. "Mate, I grew up in the Australian outback. Trust me, I've dealt with my share of cranky animals. Where I come from, everything's trying to kill you before breakfast." Lieutenant Vex approached, carrying a detailed briefing file. "Sir, perhaps we should show Mr. Harrison the creature's specifications and attack patterns first." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Nah, I prefer to meet 'em face-to-face first. Get a feel for their personality. Every animal's got one, you know." Zelthar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Mr. Harrison, this is not some domestic animal. This creature has intelligence. It studies its prey. It plans its attacks. It has shown sadistic pleasure in the pain of others." "Sounds like a big cat I once knew," Jake replied with a grin. "Cranky old thing used to terrorize the whole neighborhood. But once you understand what they want, most creatures are pretty reasonable." The walk to the containment facility was tense. Zelthar kept expecting the human to ask for protective gear or weapons. Instead, Jake whistled a cheerful tune and asked about the station's recreational facilities. "You've got to understand," Zelthar said as they approached the containment level. "Every specialist who has attempted to work with this creature has either been killed or severely traumatized. The empathic healers refuse to even enter the same section of the station." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That's because they're approaching it wrong. You're treating it like a monster. But every creature, no matter how dangerous, has needs and motivations. You just need to figure out what they are." They entered the observation deck overlooking the containment unit. The creature was lying in the center of the chamber, its red eyes tracking their movement. When it saw them, it rose to its full height and released a bone-chilling roar that shook the reinforced walls. Every alien in the room stepped back instinctively. The sound activated primal fear responses in their brains. Even through the thick barriers, they could feel the creature's malevolent presence. Jake, however, stepped closer to the viewing window. He studied the creature with the same casual interest someone might show when looking at an interesting bird. "Beautiful specimen," Jake said quietly. "Look at that musculature. And those eyes. There's definitely intelligence there. How long has he been in captivity?" 6 months, Vex replied, her voice shaking slightly. "We captured it during a raid on an enemy research facility." Jake nodded and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. He began making quick sketches while observing the creature's behavior. "Has anyone tried simply talking to it?" Jake asked. Zelthar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Talking to it? Mr. Harrison, this creature has demonstrated nothing but murderous intent. It doesn't communicate. It only kills." Jake continued studying the creature through the viewing window, making notes in his small book. The beast had noticed his attention and was now staring directly at him. Unlike the fearful reactions it was accustomed to, Jake met its gaze calmly. "Every animal communicates," Jake said, not looking away from the creature. "The question is whether we're smart enough to understand their language." "What's his name?" "Name?" Lieutenant Vex looked confused. "We designated it as Subject 7749. Jake shook his head and clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "That's your first mistake right there, mate. You've turned him into a number instead of recognizing him as an individual. No wonder he's angry." The creature in the containment unit began pacing again, but this time its movement seemed different. Instead of the aggressive stalking pattern they had observed before, it was moving in a more circular fashion, occasionally glancing up at Jake. "Look at that," Jake pointed. "He's not pacing randomly. He's trying to show us something. See how he keeps looking at the same spot on the wall?" Zelthar followed Jake's gaze. The creature was indeed focusing on a particular section of the containment wall. There were scratch marks there, deep gouges that formed what almost looked like deliberate patterns. "We assumed those were just random damage from his attempts to escape," Vex said quietly. Jake studied the marks more carefully. "Those aren't escape attempts. Those are symbols. He's been trying to communicate this whole time, and you've been ignoring him." The revelation sent a chill through the observation deck. The idea that this creature had been attempting communication while they treated it as a mindless beast was disturbing to consider. "I want to go down there," Jake announced, closing his notebook. "Absolutely not," Zelthar said firmly. "That creature will kill you within seconds of entry. Our safety protocols strictly forbid direct contact." Jake smiled and patted Zelthar on the shoulder. "Mate, I appreciate your concern, but trust me on this one. I've got a feeling about our friend down there. Besides, what you're doing now isn't working. Sometimes you've got to try a different approach." Despite every instinct screaming against it, Zelthar found himself authorizing Jake's entry into the containment area. Additional security forces were stationed around the perimeter, ready to intervene if things went wrong. Jake entered through the airlock wearing nothing more than his regular clothes. He carried no weapons, no protective gear, and no communication devices. The creature immediately noticed his presence and turned to face him, its massive form casting a dark shadow across the chamber. For a moment that seemed to last forever, human and creature stared at each other. The beast's red eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both alien and familiar. Jake could see curiosity mixed with the anger and frustration. "G'day there, big fella," Jake said in a calm, conversational tone. "Name's Jake, sorry about the accommodations. I know this place isn't much to look at." The creature tilted its head slightly, a gesture that was surprisingly dog-like despite its fearsome appearance. It made a low rumbling sound that was different from its previous roars. Jake slowly approached, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. "I see you've been trying to tell these folks something. Mind showing me what you've been working on?" The creature looked at him for another long moment, then walked over to the wall where it had made the scratch marks. Up close, Jake could see that the patterns were even more complex than they had appeared from the observation deck. "These are coordinates," Jake realized, tracing one of the symbols with his finger. "You're trying to tell them where you come from." The creature made another sound, this one almost like a purr mixed with a growl. It began using its claws to create new marks on the wall, working carefully to create precise symbols. From the observation deck, Zelthar watched in amazement as the supposedly mindless killing machine demonstrated clear intelligence and purpose. The human stood calmly next to it, occasionally nodding or making encouraging sounds. "Sir, this is unprecedented," Vex whispered. "The creature hasn't shown aggressive behavior since the human entered." Jake spent nearly an hour in the containment unit, observing the creature's behavior and trying to understand its communication attempts. The beast seemed frustrated at times, but never directed any hostility toward Jake. Finally, Jake returned to the observation deck with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well?" Zelthar asked anxiously. "He's not a monster," Jake said simply. "He's homesick. Those coordinates he's been scratching? They're directions to his homeworld. He's been trying to tell you where he belongs so you can send him back." The revelation hit the research team like a thunderbolt. They had been treating the creature as a dangerous specimen when it was actually a displaced being, trying to communicate its desire to return home. "But the attacks," Vex protested. "The violence," Jake nodded grimly. "Imagine if someone kidnapped you and locked you in a cage for 6 months. Imagine if everyone who came near you treated you like a dangerous animal instead of a person. How would you react?" Zelthar felt a wave of shame wash over him. They had been so focused on the creature's dangerous capabilities that they had never considered it might have feelings and motivations beyond simple aggression. "What do you propose we do?" Zelthar asked. Jake looked back toward the containment unit. "First, we stop calling him Subject 7749. He deserves a proper name. How about Warrior? That seems to fit his bearing. And then we start treating him like the intelligent being he is instead of a lab specimen. And we seriously consider his request to go home." The creature, as if sensing the change in attitude from the observation deck, looked up at them and made a sound that could almost be interpreted as hopeful. Jake grinned and waved at the creature. "Don't worry, mate. We'll figure this out." The creature responded with what sounded remarkably like a pleased rumble, settling down into a more relaxed position than anyone had seen it take since its capture. The next morning, Jake arrived at the containment facility carrying a large bag and wearing the same cheerful expression that had initially confused the alien crew. Word of his success with the creature had spread throughout the station, and many staff members found excuses to observe his work. "What's in the bag?" Lieutenant Vex asked as they walked toward the observation deck. "Breakfast," Jake replied with a grin, "and some other things that might help Warrior feel more at home." Commander Zelthar joined them, looking more rested than he had in weeks. The creature's calm behavior since Jake's intervention had allowed the entire security team to finally get proper sleep. "The Federation Council has been briefed on your success," Zelthar informed Jake. "They're skeptical, but willing to let you continue your work," Jake chuckled. "Skeptical is probably the right word. I imagine this isn't how your people usually handle dangerous situations." Through the viewing window, they could see Warrior lying in his usual spot, but his posture was different. Instead of the coiled tension they had grown accustomed to, he appeared almost relaxed. His red eyes tracked their arrival with interest rather than hostility. "Has he eaten anything since yesterday?" Jake asked. "No," Vex replied. "He's refused all food since his capture. We've been keeping him alive through nutrient injections during his brief unconscious periods." Jake frowned. 6 months without eating? That's not good for anyone's mood. "Let me try something." He entered the containment area carrying his bag. Warrior immediately rose to greet him, making the same rumbling sound that seemed to indicate pleasure or approval. "Morning, mate," Jake said warmly. "Brought you something special today." From his bag, Jake pulled out several items that made the observation team gasp in surprise. There was fresh meat, but also fruits, vegetables, and what appeared to be various earth herbs and spices. "How did you acquire those items?" Zelthar asked through the communication system. "Asked your replicator systems to make some earth foods," Jake explained as he arranged the items on the floor. Figured our friend here might be tired of whatever synthetic stuff you've been trying to feed him. Warrior approached the food cautiously, sniffing each item with obvious interest. His massive head moved from piece to piece, taking in the different scents. Jake sat down cross-legged near the food, maintaining a relaxed posture. Go ahead, big guy. It's all yours. To everyone's amazement, Warrior began eating. He started with the meat, tearing into it with obvious hunger, but then moved to the fruits and vegetables. He seemed particularly interested in the herbs, rolling them around with his tongue before swallowing. Fascinating, Vex whispered. We always assumed it was purely carnivorous. Most predators are actually omnivores, Jake explained. They need different nutrients to stay healthy. Back home, even our biggest crocodiles will eat fruit when they can find it. After finishing his meal, Warrior moved closer to Jake and made a series of complex sounds. The rhythm and tone suggested an attempt at conversation. Jake listened carefully, nodding occasionally as if he understood. I know, mate. You've been trying to tell them about your diet too, haven't you? The creature made another sound that seemed distinctly affirmative. From his bag, Jake pulled out a small device that the aliens didn't recognize. It looked primitive by galactic standards, but it began making soft, rhythmic sounds when Jake activated it. Music, Jake explained when he saw their confused expressions. Every culture has it in some form. Let's see if Warrior recognizes the concept. The melody was simple and soothing. Warrior's head tilted at an angle, his red eyes focused intently on the device. After a few moments, he began making sounds that seemed to match the rhythm. He's trying to sing along, Vex said in amazement. Jake smiled and adjusted the device to match Warrior's vocal range. Soon the containment area was filled with a strange but harmonious duet between human technology and alien creature. This changes everything, Zelthar said quietly. If this creature can appreciate music, understand communication, and has specific dietary needs, then we're not dealing with a weapon at all. We're dealing with a person, Jake agreed. A very large, very dangerous person who's been treated very badly for a very long time. After the music session, Jake began working on teaching Warrior some basic gestures for communication. The creature proved to be remarkably quick to learn, picking up simple hand signals within minutes. Point to what you want, Jake demonstrated, pointing to different objects around the containment area. Warrior immediately pointed to the wall where he had scratched his coordinates. Then he pointed upward toward the ceiling. Home, Jake interpreted. You want to go home? Warrior made an enthusiastic sound and nodded his massive head. Jake pulled out his notebook and began sketching. He drew a simple representation of a spaceship, then showed it to Warrior. The creature's eyes lit up with understanding. Ship, Jake said, pointing to the drawing. Warrior carefully took the pencil in his claws and began drawing his own version. His artwork was crude but clearly showed a vessel of some kind. More importantly, he drew symbols around it that matched the coordinates he had scratched on the wall. He's showing us his ship, Jake explained to the observation team, probably how he got here in the first place. Zelthar felt pieces of a puzzle falling into place. If he had his own vessel, then he wasn't created as a weapon. He's a traveler who was captured, Jake nodded. Makes sense. Think about it from his perspective. He's probably an explorer or trader who got grabbed by your enemies. They were going to study him or use him as a weapon. Then you folks rescued him and locked him up again. No wonder he's been cranky. Throughout the afternoon, Jake continued working with Warrior, establishing basic communication and trust. The creature's behavior became increasingly cooperative, and his intelligence became more apparent with each interaction. By evening, Jake had achieved something that months of conventional Federation protocols had failed to accomplish. Warrior was calm, communicative, and even seemed to be enjoying the interaction. Tomorrow, I want to try something more ambitious, Jake announced as he prepared to leave the containment area. What did you have in mind? Zelthar asked nervously. Jake grinned and patted Warrior gently on his massive shoulder. The creature leaned into the touch like a giant cat. I think it's time we let him out of this cage and show him around the station. Our friend here has been cooped up long enough. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the observation team. But as they watched Warrior's gentle interaction with Jake, the idea began to seem less impossible and more inevitable. Commander Zelthar's sleep was interrupted by urgent chiming from his communication device. Emergency lights were flashing in his quarters, indicating a station-wide security alert. "Sir, we have a situation," came Lieutenant Vex's voice, tight with tension. "The human has released the creature from containment." Zelthar's 4 eyes snapped fully open. "He did what?" "Jake opened the containment unit 20 minutes ago. Both he and the creature are missing from the observation deck." Zelthar threw on his uniform and rushed toward the containment level, expecting to find carnage and destruction. Instead, he found Jake and Warrior in the station's main corridor, walking side by side like old friends. Warrior was massive in the open space, his head nearly touching the ceiling. His scales caught the light differently outside the containment area, revealing subtle patterns that hadn't been visible before. Despite his intimidating size, he moved with careful grace, clearly making an effort not to damage anything. Jake walked beside him casually, carrying on what appeared to be a one-sided conversation. Warrior listened intently, occasionally making sounds that seemed like responses. "Sir, should we activate the emergency containment protocols?" asked Security Chief Gron, his weapon ready but not aimed. "Hold your position," Zelthar ordered, watching the unlikely pair. "No sudden movements. Let me assess the situation first." As they approached, Jake waved cheerfully. "Morning, Commander. Warrior and I decided to take a little tour of the station. Hope you don't mind." "Mr. Harrison," Zelthar said carefully, "you realize you've just released the most dangerous creature we've ever encountered into a populated area?" Warrior made a sound that could only be interpreted as offended, and Jake chuckled. "He says he's not dangerous unless someone threatens him first. Isn't that right, mate?" The creature nodded his massive head and made what sounded like an agreeable rumble. "He's been showing me around, actually," Jake continued. "Did you know your station has several design flaws from a security perspective? Warrior here has an excellent eye for tactical weaknesses." This statement sent a chill through the security team, but Jake seemed oblivious to their concern. "What kind of weaknesses?" Zelthar asked nervously. Warrior moved toward a wall panel and pointed with one of his claws. Jake consulted his notebook, where he had apparently been taking notes on the creature's observations. "This power junction is completely exposed," Jake explained. "Anyone who wanted to disable your defensive systems could just tear out these cables. Warrior says most Federation installations have this same problem." Lieutenant Vex looked at the panel and realized the creature was absolutely correct. It was a critical vulnerability that their own security teams had somehow overlooked. "How does he know about Federation installation design?" she asked. Jake spoke to Warrior in a combination of gestures and sounds they had developed. The creature responded with a series of complex vocalizations. "He says he's been to many Federation stations before his capture." Jake translated. "He's some kind of merchant or trader. He's been documenting security weaknesses because his own people were concerned about Federation military capabilities." The implications of this revelation hit the command team like a thunderbolt. If Warrior was a civilian trader who had been captured and treated as a weapon, then they had potentially created a diplomatic incident of massive proportions. "What species is he?" Zelthar asked. Jake consulted with Warrior again, who began drawing symbols in the air with his claws. "He calls his people the Cathara," Jake said. "They're from a system beyond the Andromeda sector. Apparently they've been watching the Federation for some time, trying to decide whether to make contact. And now they know we capture and imprison their people," Vex said quietly. Warrior seemed to understand the conversation, because he made a series of sounds that Jake interpreted with growing excitement. "He's not angry about that," Jake explained. "He understands that you thought he was a weapon created by your enemies. But he is concerned about his ship and cargo." "Ship and cargo," Zelthar repeated. "When you captured him, his trading vessel was also taken. He's been trying to tell you that his cargo contains diplomatic gifts intended for first contact with the Federation." The revelation sent shockwaves through the command staff. They had been holding not just a civilian prisoner, but also potentially the key to establishing relations with an unknown spacefaring species. Jake continued translating as Warrior explained his situation. "He says his people sent him as an advanced scout to evaluate Federation intentions. His ship contains samples of Cathara technology and culture, meant to demonstrate their peaceful intentions." "Where is this ship now?" Zelthar asked. "Impounded in your evidence storage facility," Jake replied after consulting with Warrior, "along with everything else you captured from that enemy research station." Zelthar realized they had been treating priceless diplomatic materials as simple war trophies. The potential damage to future Federation relations was staggering. "We need to retrieve his belongings immediately," Zelthar declared. "This entire situation must be resolved before it becomes an interstellar incident." As they made their way toward the storage facility, more station personnel gathered to observe the unprecedented sight of a human and a Class 5 predator walking together through the corridors. Warrior seemed to enjoy the attention, carrying himself with obvious pride. "He's actually quite vain," Jake mentioned with amusement. "He's been asking if you have any reflective surfaces where he can check his appearance." Apparently, proper grooming is important in Cathera culture. At the storage facility, Warrior immediately identified several containers that belonged to him. When the containers were opened, the contents revealed the truth of his story. Inside were intricate artworks, samples of advanced but peaceful technology, and what appeared to be extensive cultural documentation. Everything was clearly intended for diplomatic exchange rather than warfare. "These are beautiful," Vex said, examining a crystalline sculpture that seemed to change colors as she moved it. Warrior made pleased sounds and gestured toward other items in his collection. Jake translated his explanations of each piece. "This one represents the Cathera concept of harmonious coexistence between different species," Jake explained, pointing to a complex metallic structure. "And this device can purify water from almost any source," which they wanted to share with drought-affected Federation worlds. Commander Zelthar felt a profound sense of shame as he realized how badly they had misunderstood the situation. This creature, who they had treated as a dangerous beast, was actually a diplomat trying to establish peaceful relations between their species. "What can we do to make this right?" Zelthar asked. Jake spoke with Warrior at length, translating the creature's responses. "He says he understands that mistakes were made on both sides. His people never properly announced their presence in Federation space, which made the situation confusing. But he would like to complete his original mission if possible." "You mean establish formal diplomatic contact?" "That's right. He wants to send a message to his people, letting them know that the Federation is open to peaceful relations. But first, he'd like to see more of your station and learn about Federation culture." Warrior made an enthusiastic sound and pointed down the corridor, clearly indicating his desire to continue exploring. Jake grinned and looked at the command team. "What do you say? Ready to give our new diplomatic friend the grand tour?" 3 days later, the research station had been transformed into something resembling a diplomatic embassy. Warrior had proven to be an enthusiastic student of Federation culture, and his presence had created unprecedented opportunities for interspecies understanding. In the station's main conference room, an unusual meeting was taking place. Warrior sat at one end of the specially reinforced table, with Jake beside him serving as translator and cultural liaison. Commander Zelthar and his senior staff occupied the other end, while Federation diplomats participated via holographic communication. "The Cathera High Council has agreed to formal diplomatic talks," Jake translated as Warrior communicated through their developed system of sounds and gestures. "They're impressed by how quickly the situation was resolved once proper communication was established." Ambassador Thylon, appearing as a shimmering hologram from Federation headquarters, leaned forward with interest. "What are their initial terms for establishing relations?" Warrior responded with a series of complex vocalizations, occasionally pausing to ensure Jake understood correctly. "They propose a gradual integration," Jake explained, "starting with trade agreements and cultural exchanges. They have technologies that could benefit both civilizations, particularly in the areas of biotechnology and sustainable energy." "And in return?" Ambassador Thylon asked. Jake listened as Warrior explained, making notes in his ever-present notebook. "They want access to Federation navigation databases and defensive technologies. Not for conquest, but for protection. Apparently there are other species in their region that aren't as peaceful as the Cathara." Lieutenant Vex studied the datapad in front of her. "Our analysts have confirmed that the technologies in Warrior's cargo could revolutionize several Federation industries. The water purification device alone could solve the drought crisis on 14 worlds." Ambassador Thylon nodded approvingly. "This is remarkable progress. Who would have thought that a human animal handler would succeed where our top diplomats had failed?" Jake chuckled at the description. "I'm not really an animal handler, sir. Back home, I run a wildlife rehabilitation center. I help injured and displaced creatures recover and return to their natural environments. Warrior made a sound that everyone had learned indicated amusement, and Jake grinned in response. "What's funny?" Zelthar asked. "He says that's exactly what I did for him. Helped a displaced creature recover and prepare to return to his natural environment." The comparison drew smiles from around the table. Over the past few days, they had all grown accustomed to Warrior's presence and had begun to see him as an individual rather than a threat. "There is one complication," Jake continued, his expression becoming more serious. "Warrior's people are concerned about something they call the Shadow Fleet." Ambassador Thylan's holographic image flickered with sudden attention. "Shadow Fleet? Can you get more details?" Jake communicated with Warrior, who responded with obvious urgency. The creature began drawing symbols in the air, creating complex patterns that Jake carefully copied into his notebook. "These are the enemy forces that captured Warrior originally," Jake explained. "They're not part of any known civilization. Warrior's people have been tracking them for some time. They appear to be a coalition of rogue elements from multiple species." "What are their intentions?" Zelthar asked. Warrior's response was long and detailed, requiring several clarifications before Jake could translate accurately. "They're collecting biological specimens from across the galaxy," Jake said grimly. "Not for research or conservation, but for creating weapons. Warrior was captured because they wanted to study his species' natural abilities and weaponize them." The revelation sent a chill through the conference room. The implications of an organization dedicated to creating biological weapons were terrifying. "The Federation has been tracking similar activities," Ambassador Thylan admitted, "but we haven't been able to identify the source. If the Cathara have intelligence on this Shadow Fleet, it could be invaluable." Jake continued translating Warrior's information. "His people have been fighting a defensive war against these forces for decades. They've learned to hide their population centers and avoid open conflict, but they're losing ground." "Is that why they want Federation defensive technologies?" Vex asked. "Partly," Jake confirmed after checking with Warrior. "But they also want to share intelligence and coordinate defensive strategies. They believe the Shadow Fleet will eventually target Federation worlds if they aren't stopped." Ambassador Thylan's expression grew grave. "This changes the entire diplomatic situation. We're not just discussing trade agreements anymore. We're talking about a military alliance against a common enemy." Warrior made a series of sounds that Jake recognized as agreement, followed by additional information. "He says his ship contains detailed intelligence about Shadow Fleet operations," Jake translated, "including the locations of several hidden bases and information about their command structure. Can we access this information?" Zelthar asked. Jake spoke with Warrior, who responded by standing and moving toward the conference room's computer interface. With surprising gentleness for such a large creature, he began manipulating the controls. "He's accessing his ship's communication system," Jake explained. "He wants to show you the intelligence data directly." The main display screen activated, showing star charts and tactical information that made the Federation officers lean forward with interest. The scope and detail of the intelligence was impressive. "This is extraordinary," Thylan said. "This information could help us prevent attacks on dozens of Federation worlds." Warrior continued operating the interface, bringing up additional files. The data showed a pattern of Shadow Fleet activities that painted a disturbing picture of their long-term strategy. "They're not just collecting specimens randomly," Jake interpreted. "They're systematically targeting species with specific abilities. Enhanced strength, natural armor, poisonous secretions, advanced sensory capabilities. They're building an army," Zelthar realized. "A biological army," Jake confirmed, "using the natural abilities of captured species to create perfect soldiers for different environments and combat situations." The implications were staggering. If the Shadow Fleet succeeded in their plans, they would possess military capabilities unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Warrior made additional sounds, and Jake's expression became even more serious. "There's more," Jake said quietly. "Warrior says his people have discovered that the Shadow Fleet has been infiltrating Federation space for months. They have agents on multiple worlds, gathering intelligence and identifying high-value targets." Ambassador Thylan's holographic form leaned forward urgently. "Does he know which worlds?" Jake translated the question, and Warrior responded by accessing more files from his ship's database. A list of Federation worlds appeared on the screen, many of them marked with various symbols. The symbols indicate different types of operations. Jake explained as Warrior continued his briefing. Red symbols mark worlds targeted for specimen collection. Blue symbols indicate intelligence-gathering operations, and these yellow ones, Jake paused, double-checking with Warrior to ensure accurate translation. Yellow symbols mark worlds scheduled for complete biological harvesting within the next galactic cycle. The silence that followed was deafening. The scope of the threat was far greater than anyone had imagined. How many Federation citizens live on those yellow-marked worlds? Vex asked quietly. Zelthar quickly consulted his datapad. Over 2 billion. Warrior made more sounds and Jake nodded grimly. He says the Shadow Fleet has perfected their harvesting techniques. They can strip a world of all biological material within days, leaving nothing but empty cities and barren landscapes. This intelligence must be transmitted to Federation Command immediately, Ambassador Thylan declared. We need to warn those worlds and begin defensive preparations. Warrior agrees, Jake said. But he also wants to propose something else. His people are willing to share their defensive technologies and coordinate a joint operation against the Shadow Fleet's main base. They know where the main base is located? Zelthar asked with surprise. Jake spoke with Warrior, who brought up another star chart on the display. A single system was highlighted in the outer rim of the galaxy, far from any known Federation territory. They've been tracking Shadow Fleet movements for decades, Jake explained. The main base is heavily fortified and defended by captured creatures from dozens of worlds. But Warrior's people have developed strategies for dealing with biological weapons. Ambassador Thylan studied the tactical information with growing excitement. A joint operation could succeed where individual efforts have failed. The Federation has the military strength, and the Cathara have the specialized knowledge. There's just one problem, Jake added after further consultation with Warrior. The mission would require someone who can communicate with and potentially control the captured creatures that the Shadow Fleet is using as guards and weapons. The implication hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew exactly who Warrior was suggesting for that role. Mr. Harrison, Ambassador Thylan said carefully, would you be willing to participate in such a mission? Jake looked at Warrior, who made encouraging sounds and what could only be interpreted as a reassuring gesture. Well, Jake said with his characteristic grin, I did come here to help with a dangerous creature problem. Looks like the problem just got a bit bigger than we initially thought. Warrior rumbled with what sounded distinctly like laughter, and even the tense Federation officers couldn't help but smile at the humans' casual attitude toward what was shaping up to be the most dangerous mission in galactic history. 6 weeks later, the most unusual military fleet in galactic history approached the Shadow Fleet's main base. Federation warships flew alongside elegant Cathara vessels, their combined forces representing the first true alliance between the two civilizations. Jake stood on the bridge of the lead Federation cruiser, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Beside him, Warrior had been fitted with a specially designed communication harness that allowed him to interface directly with the ship's systems. Enemy base is coming into sensor range, reported Captain Morvex, the ship's commanding officer. Initial scans confirm Warrior's intelligence. The facility is massive. On the main screen, the Shadow Fleet base appeared as a dark structure built into a large asteroid. Multiple docking ports showed the shapes of vessels from dozens of different species, all apparently captured or converted to serve the Shadow Fleet's purposes. Biological signatures are off the charts, Lieutenant Vex reported from her station. I'm reading hundreds of different life forms concentrated in the central areas of the base. Warrior made a series of sounds that Jake had learned to recognize as concern mixed with determination. He says many of those creatures are probably in the same situation he was, Jake translated, captured from their homeworlds and forced to serve as weapons or guards. That's going to complicate our assault strategy, Captain Morvex noted. We can't use heavy weapons if we might harm innocent prisoners. Jake patted Warrior's massive shoulder reassuringly. That's why we're here, mate. Time to put our communication skills to the test. The assault began with Cathara ships using their advanced stealth technology to insert small teams onto the base's outer sections. Meanwhile, Federation forces engaged the Shadow Fleet's defensive ships, drawing attention away from the infiltration effort. Jake and Warrior were part of the primary infiltration team, along with a squad of Federation Marines and 2 Cathara warriors who had volunteered for the mission. Their objective was to reach the central biological containment areas and neutralize the captured creatures being used as living weapons. The base's interior was a nightmare of twisted corridors and improvised containment systems. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as the team moved deeper into the facility. "Movement ahead," warned Sergeant Class, the Marine squad leader. Large biological signature approaching. Around the corner came a creature that made even Warrior look small by comparison. It was covered in chitinous armor and moved on 6 powerful legs with multiple arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes glowed with the same red light they had originally seen in Warrior's gaze. The Marines raised their weapons, but Jake stepped forward with his hands raised peacefully. "Easy there, big fella," Jake said in the same calm tone he had used with Warrior months earlier. "We're here to help." The creature paused, tilting its massive head as it studied the unusual group. Jake began using the same gesture-based communication system he had developed with Warrior. Warrior joined in, making sounds that seemed to resonate with the captured creature. After several tense minutes, the armored giant made a sound that was unmistakably relieved. "He says his name translates roughly to Stone Crusher," Jake reported. "He's been forced to guard this section for over a year. He wants to know if we're really here to help him escape. Tell him we're shutting this whole operation down," Sergeant Class replied. Jake communicated this information, and Stonecrusher's response was immediate and enthusiastic. The massive creature turned and began leading them deeper into the base, apparently eager to help with the liberation effort. As they progressed through the facility, they encountered more captured creatures. Each one presented a unique challenge in communication and trust building. But Jake's patient approach and Warrior's growing confidence as a translator allowed them to build an increasingly large liberation force. "This is incredible," Lieutenant Vex reported through the communication system. "Biosignatures throughout the base are shifting from hostile to cooperative. Whatever you're doing down there is working." In the base's central command area, they finally encountered Shadow Fleet personnel. The enemy forces were a disturbing mix of different species, all apparently modified with cybernetic implants that suppressed their individual personalities. "They're not volunteers," Jake realized as he observed their mechanical movements. "They're victims too. Those implants are controlling them." The final confrontation was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. Instead of weapons fire and explosions, it became a massive effort to communicate with and liberate hundreds of enslaved beings. Jake found himself at the center of it all, using every technique he had learned to reach creatures whose natural communication abilities had been suppressed or corrupted. Warrior proved invaluable as both translator and example. His own transformation from apparent monster to diplomatic ally gave hope to creatures who had been used as weapons for years. The implant control systems are in the main computer core. Stone Crusher communicated through their developing sign language. "If we can destroy them, all the controlled personnel will be freed." The destruction of the control systems triggered a cascade of liberation throughout the base. Cybernetic implants shut down, revealing confused but grateful beings who had been forced to serve the Shadow Fleet against their will. In the aftermath, as Federation and Cathera forces secured the base and began the massive task of repatriating hundreds of displaced beings, Jake found himself sitting in what had once been the base's command center. Warrior approached and made a series of sounds that Jake had learned to recognize as gratitude and respect. "He's thanking me," Jake explained to Captain Morvex. "But honestly, I think I should be thanking him. This whole experience has taught me more about communication and understanding than years of working with Earth animals ever did." Warrior made another sound, and Jake chuckled. "He says that's the point. Real communication isn't about speaking the same language. It's about recognizing that everyone, no matter how different they might seem, has something valuable to say." Ambassador Thylon, who had arrived with the mop-up forces, approached with a smile. "Mr. Harrison, on behalf of the Federation, I want to thank you for your service. Your unique approach to interspecies communication has not only prevented a galactic catastrophe, but also established the foundation for a new era of cooperation." Jake stood and stretched, looking around at the diverse group of beings who were now working together to process the rescued creatures. Humans, Cathara, and dozens of other species were collaborating with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said with a grin. "We've proven that no matter how dangerous something appears on the surface, There's usually a reasonable being underneath just trying to communicate their needs. Warrior made a sound that could only be interpreted as agreement, then added something that made Jake laugh out loud. What did he say? Vex asked. He said that next time I visit his homeworld, he's going to introduce me to his father. Apparently his dad is even bigger and scarier looking than he is, but he makes the best fermented fruit drinks in 3-star systems. Jake extended his hand toward Warrior, who carefully grasped it with one of his massive claws in a gesture that had become their standard greeting. Cheers, mate, Jake said with genuine affection. Warrior rumbled a response that everyone present somehow understood perfectly, despite the language barrier. Cheers, Father Boss.